Hey everybody, this is Blake here. I am going to be reviewing Snow White and the Huntsman. Now this was a movie I really did not want to see all that much. At first I was thinking it looked a little too Twilight-y for me, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that it seemed more like it was going to be Red Riding Hood, which is a Twilight clone that is in some ways better than Twilight, but in some ways worse because it actually teases you with being a good movie. It actually has a lot of cool ideas. I really did like the film's atmosphere and visual style, even though, yeah, it's pretty phony looking. I thought it fit the fairy tale setting. But then it's like the Twilight love triangle had to invade that coolness. And in some ways, actually most ways, I'd say the love triangle and Red Riding Hood is even worse than the one in Twilight because it's just even more underdeveloped, but it takes up so much screen time. So I was just thinking, okay, please, Snow White and the Huntsman, don't be like Red Riding Hood. Well, luckily it's not, even though it seems like somebody, maybe one of the screenwriters or maybe an exec, they wanted some sort of Twilight love triangle because there is a love triangle, but they spend like 2 minutes on it. For the most part, Snow White and the Huntsman is much more akin to, let's say, Lord of the Rings than it is to Twilight or Red Riding Hood. It's not as good as Lord of the Rings, but I did enjoy it more than I expected. But then again, it might be because my expectations were just that low. Pretty much what makes this movie work is that every single scene introduces a new and awesome set piece. The different forests, you have the cursed forest, which is actually pretty menacing and spooky looking. Then you have this enchanted forest, which is very enchanting. There's a lot of cool and unique creature designs that had my audience in my theater gasping. And there was a lot of oohs and ahs. And, it's always cool when you get to listen to the theater's reaction when you don't hate the movie. I mean, I guess if you hated this movie and the theater was cooing over it, you'd be all pissed off. But the CGI, it is very good, but when it's off, it didn't bother me as much because once again, it fit that sort of fairy tale type setting, which is often very over the top and not really realistic. It goes for more, it's more exaggerated with its sets and its visuals, but I thought it worked all right. And really, that's all I have to say about the visuals, that they were just really well done. The practical sets were really effective, but then the digital sets were also really cool. And, I was completely enamored by this film's visual style. Unfortunately, the script isn't very good. It's not atrocious, it's not super awful, but it's very unfocused and confused, probably because there was like 3 screenwriters involved. But it's like everybody had a different story they wanted to tell. Sometimes I wondered if the movie was more interested in focusing on the Queen because, she's the most interesting character in the whole movie, and I can't think of her name, Charlize Theron, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. She's... most people believe that she gave the best performance in the whole film, and I actually agree, but I also think she kind of went too over the top at times to the point of becoming really unintentionally funny, but at least it was entertaining. But yeah, I think the movie, maybe it should have followed her. That would have been interesting. But then at times it wants to focus, on this love triangle, which is so underdeveloped. Pretty much what the love story between Snow White and the Huntsman is they meet, they kind of bicker because they don't like each other at first, but then immediately they're in love. It's sort of like the Prince of Persia love story, but at least with Prince of Persia, the bulk of that film actually did focus on these 2 characters developing with each other. So, I mean, it kind of worked there, but it does not work here. And then the third wheel of the love triangle is this guy who the movie has absolutely no idea what to do with him. He shows up, and you see him working to join the actual party that includes Snow White and her allies. And once he just shows up there, it's like he's just there. The movie had no interest in that character whatsoever, so it makes the whole love triangle seem pointless, but it never becomes so overbearing to the point where I became annoyed with it or bored from it because it just doesn't take up that much time. Snow White herself is a very boring and static character, though. She's pretty much perfect, and she never develops in any way, shape, or form. I was wondering if they were going to focus on her being maybe a little bit spoiled, even if she means well. Watching all these people suffering all around her was going to cause her to develop in some way, but it never really seems to. Kristen Stewart, she does fine with what she has to do. I actually do think that she's a better actress than most people realize. But unfortunately, I think she's being typecast for her Twilight role, because for the most part, she's kind of playing Bella Swan once again. I think that's the character's name, Bella Swan. She's more or less playing that same kind of role again, but she's a lot less detestable. You know, she's just sort of flat and there, but she looks really good. And she didn't take away from the movie, but she didn't add anything to it either. Chris Hemsworth is pretty much playing Thor again, but with a dash of Sam Worthington. At times, I swear that he even throws his axe just like Thor throws his hammer. But, you know, he does his best. I actually really do respect Chris Hemsworth as an actor, even though he's pretty much playing a cliche. You know, he really... He adds conviction to the role. I mean, he really is going all out. And my problem with that character, though, is that we've seen that kind of character way too many times before. You know, he lost his wife in the past, so now he's kind of a lost drunkard, and, you know, helping Snow White is sort of his redemption. You know, apparently Viggo Mortensen was at one point considered to play this role. And I'm thinking, that's kind of weird if they would have gone ahead with that love story, because he just seems way too old for Kristen Stewart, but they didn't. So maybe the love story was a last-minute addition, I don't know. But, you know, he does fine. Who else is there? Really, I thought the most interesting characters were the dwarves. They had the most personality, and I mean, each of them has their own personality, and they were a lot of fun. I think this movie would have benefited from focusing more on them and why they are following Snow White. The way they go about it, they just decided to join her for half-assed reasons. And I wish they would have focused more on them because, like I said, they had the most personalities. They're all played by actors who obviously aren't little people, but I recognized all of them, if not by name, then by face. I mean, Bob Hoskins plays one of them. Ian McShane plays one of them. Nick Frost plays one of them. And then, like, other guys who I might not know by name, but you have that kind of weird-looking guy from Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy and The Right. The guy who plays Inspector Lestrade from the Sherlock Holmes movies, the newer one, he's some of them. But, you know, they're all played by interesting actors who do a great job in their limited screen time. And I just wished it was more about them and Snow White instead of the lame-ass love story with the Huntsman. And, but otherwise, you know, the acting is fine. Nothing really stands out as great, but nothing really as bad either. But the problem is that it doesn't really know what it wants to focus on or who it wants to focus on. Does it want to focus on Snow White or her relationship with the Huntsman? Or does it want to focus more on the Huntsman's character and how Snow White relates to him? Or does it want to focus on the dwarfs? It keeps changing its mind, and then it'll add certain subplots. Like, for example, Snow White apparently has some sort of mystical powers. You know, the planet actually seems to be helping her. But it's just kind of a random addition that they don't really do a whole lot with. So it's like, why did they even bother introducing that weird subplot to begin with? And, you know, when she suddenly becomes this political leader that everybody rallies behind, that's just too contrived because they never really focused enough on her charisma. And so when she starts doing her big speech at the end, it's like, okay, come on, seriously, movie. And it just seems overcomplicated. There's a lot of scenes that this movie did not need. It could have been, they could have shaved out like at least 15 minutes of this. It absolutely did not need to go past 2 hours long. So I think that maybe because they had 3 screenwriters involved, that's probably why. Because I notice when you have more screenwriters like that, that's when the story becomes sort of lost in itself. Like Green Lantern was probably the poster child of that. With there's a lot of stuff that this movie doesn't really seem to need, and like it wants to maybe explore something, but it never does. So, but luckily at the same time, the script is relatively harmless. It's not really bad. It's just sort of there. But when it came to this movie, I think it works because the cool visuals sort of cover that up. It doesn't necessarily excuse it, but I'll say this: the awesome visuals upstaged the rest of the movie. So that was my anchor. I was more interested in watching these new and creative set pieces, these creature designs, the CGI. That's what really drew me to the film. And whereas I just kind of ignored the problems because, you know, they're very conventional, but they're not notably bad either. So, would I recommend this movie? I'm going to say this. If you, like me, can forgive a movie if it doesn't have a very good script, but if the visuals are really cool, like for example, Avatar, I think has a very mediocre script, but the visuals are just so cool and amazing that I could forgive the movie's shortcomings and I'll like it, even if it's not a great movie. If you're like that, then I'd say Snow White and the Huntsman is worth watching at a matinee. Now, if you're one of those people who think, visuals don't really matter to me, I'm more interested in the story or characters, you might want to just wait till it comes out on DVD, or maybe not even see it at all. I guess it's just one of those things you have to really consider what you want out of it and what you like about film in general. So if you're not interested in visuals at all, or you don't really care about Lord of the Rings or those kinds of epics, don't bother watching it. But if you do and you just want to see an okay movie that has some really cool stuff, even if it's not great as a whole, go ahead and give it a look. So that's that. On my new Critiquing the Critics episode that's coming out, I do plan on having at least one part up of my Spoonie review this week. I have 3 days off. I'm actually hoping I can get both parts up, but if I don't, I'll just release the first part on my website, whereas it will just be unlisted throughout YouTube until I get the second part done. So that's that. If you want to read my written review, just check the link in my description. Follow me on Twitter, and I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll see you guys later.